"Sir, you need to come with me right now. We don't tolerate cheaters at this establishment." The words cut through the casino floor as pit boss Richard Castellano towered over the elderly man at table 7. The man's weathered hands rested gently on the green felt, chips stacked neatly before him. "I'm not cheating," he said quietly, his voice steady but soft. Richard scoffed. "5 consecutive wins. Perfect basic strategy. You're counting cards, and we both know it." The man didn't argue. He simply reached down beside his chair. That's when Richard saw it. The white cane. The kind blind people use. If you believe in treating our veterans with dignity and respect, type honor in the comments right now. Alan Foster hadn't meant to win so much. He'd come to the Silver Sands Casino on a Tuesday afternoon because it was something to do. Somewhere to go where he didn't have to sit alone in his apartment listening to audiobooks and remembering a life that felt increasingly distant. At 73 years old, Alan had learned to navigate a world without sight for over 3 decades now. He'd learned to read Braille, to cook using timers and careful organization, to recognize voices and footsteps with uncanny accuracy. He'd even learned to play blackjack by touch, feeling the embossed corners of specially designed cards at a veterans' recreation center. It wasn't about gambling. It was about the feel of the cards, the social interaction, the simple human connection of sitting at a table with other people. He'd saved up his disability check to have one afternoon of normalcy, of feeling like he was part of the world again instead of just existing on its margins. The cards at the Silver Sands weren't embossed, but Alan had developed his own system over the years. He would ask the dealer to announce each card clearly. The accommodation casinos were legally required to provide. He played basic strategy, memorized decades ago, making decisions based purely on what he heard and probability. There was no card counting. There couldn't be. Card counting required tracking specific cards through the shoe, building a mental count of high versus low cards remaining. Alan couldn't see the cards being played at other positions. He couldn't see the cards in the discard tray. He could barely remember what he'd been dealt by the time the hand was over. He was just an old blind man trying to enjoy an afternoon playing cards, nothing more. Richard Castellano had been pit boss at the Silver Sands for 7 years. He prided himself on spotting advantage players, the card counters, the shuffle trackers, the teams who use signals to beat the house, when he noticed the elderly man at table 7 winning hand after hand, making perfect decisions, never busting when he should stand, always hitting when the math said to hit, Richard's instincts fired. This was his job. Protect the casino, protect the profits. He'd backed off dozens of card counters over the years, sometimes politely, sometimes not. This old man was no different. Richard didn't care that he looked harmless or that he was alone. Cheaters came in all shapes and sizes, and this one had gotten sloppy, winning too much too fast. "Sir, I'm going to need you to cash out and leave," Richard said, his voice loud enough to draw attention from neighboring tables. Alan's hand found the white cane leaning against his chair. "I'm blind," he said simply. "I can't count cards. I'm just playing basic strategy." Richard felt a flicker of doubt, but pushed it aside. He'd seen cons before. "Sure you are," he said, sarcasm dripping from his words. "And I suppose that cane is just for show?" A few players at nearby tables had stopped to watch. The dealer, a young woman named Maria, looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Castellano," she started, "he's been asking me to announce every card. I thought—" Richard cut her off with a sharp gesture. "I don't care what you thought. This player is done for today." He reached for Alan's chips, starting to rack them up. "I'll walk you to the cage." Alan sat very still, his sightless eyes fixed somewhere in the middle distance. His jaw tightened. "I would prefer to cash out myself," he said quietly. "I know the way." Richard laughed, a short, harsh sound. "I bet you do. You seem to know your way around a casino pretty well for a blind man." The words hung in the air, cruel and mocking. An older couple at the next table looked away, embarrassed. Maria the dealer bit her lip. Alan stood slowly, one hand finding his cane, the other reaching for his chips. That's when Richard grabbed his arm, hard. "I said I'll walk you." Alan's free hand moved instinctively, not aggressively but defensively, a muscle memory from another life. For just a second, his posture changed. Straight, ready, alert. Then it softened again. "Please let go of my arm," he said, still quiet, still controlled. The confrontation might have escalated further, but a voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Richard, my office. Now." Pauline Grant, the casino's general manager, stood 10 feet away, her expression carved from ice. Richard released Alan's arm, confusion replacing his aggressive confidence. "Ma'am, this player was—" Pauline held up one hand. "I said now. Maria, please assist Mr. Foster to the cage and ensure he receives his winnings with the casino's sincere apologies." She turned to Alan, her voice completely different, warm, respectful. "Mr. Foster, I'm so deeply sorry for this treatment. Please, if you'll allow us a moment, I'd like to speak with you privately before you leave." Alan hesitated, then nodded slowly. Richard's face flushed red. "You're apologizing to a card counter?" Pauline's eyes went hard. "My office. This is not a discussion." 5 minutes later, Richard stood in Pauline's office, his confidence evaporating. "Do you know who that man is?" Pauline asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Richard shrugged. "Some guy who—" Pauline cut him off. "That man is Alan Foster, Staff Sergeant Alan Foster, United States Army. February 1991, during the Gulf War, his convoy hit an IED outside Kuwait City. The explosion flipped a Humvee, ruptured its fuel tank. White phosphorus ordnance inside caught fire." She paused, letting that sink in. "White phosphorus burns at 5,000 degrees, Richard. It burns through metal, through Kevlar, through flesh. It doesn't stop. Staff Sergeant Foster was knocked clear in the initial blast. He was safe. He was going to live." Richard's throat went dry. He went back into that burning vehicle, 6 soldiers trapped inside, screaming, burning alive. He pulled out 4 before the ammunition started cooking off. He kept going. Pulled out the 5th. The 6th. When he got the last man clear, a white phosphorus fragment was embedded in his own face. He didn't scream, didn't stop. He made sure all 6 soldiers were away from the vehicle before he finally collapsed. Pauline pulled up something on her computer, turned the monitor toward Richard. A military photograph from 1991. A young man in BDUs, handsome, whole, his eyes bright and alive. The name tape read Foster. They evacuated him to Germany. The fragment had already destroyed both eyes completely. The damage was so severe they had to remove them entirely. 26 years old, and he'd never see again. He spent 2 years in recovery, learning Braille, learning to walk with a cane, learning to live in permanent darkness. She closed the image. He was awarded the Silver Star for valor. 6 men came home to their families because Staff Sergeant Foster valued their lives more than his own sight, more than his own life. Richard felt sick. How was I supposed to—" Pauline's voice went cold. "You were supposed to ask questions. You were supposed to show basic human decency. You were supposed to remember that not everything is about protecting the casino's bottom line." Richard found Alan Foster in Pauline's private lounge 20 minutes later, after being ordered to apologize in person. Alan sat in a leather chair, his cane across his lap, a glass of water untouched on the table beside him. "Mr. Foster," Richard began, his voice cracking, I owe you an apology. I was completely out of line. I didn't know." Alan turned his head slightly toward Richard's voice. "You didn't know I was blind? My cane wasn't clear enough?" Richard swallowed hard. I don't know what I thought. I was wrong. About all of it." Alan was quiet for a long moment. "I wasn't counting cards, Mr. Castellano. I was just playing, just trying to have one afternoon where I felt like a regular person instead of a disability, instead of a burden, instead of someone people pity or ignore." His voice remained steady, but there was weight behind it, decades of weight. "I just wanted to play cards." Richard stood there, words failing him completely. "Those soldiers you saved," he finally managed. Do you, still?" Alan's expression softened slightly. "I hear from 2 of them every Christmas. One lives in Oregon, one in Texas. We talk on the phone. They tell me about their children, their grandchildren. Lives their living because they got to go home." He paused. "The others moved on. I don't blame them. Sometimes the past is too heavy to carry." Richard felt something break inside his chest. "I called you a cheater. I grabbed you. I mocked your blindness." Alan nodded slowly. "Yes, you did." No anger in his voice. Just fact. Richard knelt down, bringing himself to Alan's level. "Mr. Foster, I will never be able to make this right, but I swear to you, I will be better. I will do better." Alan extended his hand. Richard took it. "That's all any of us can do," Alan said quietly. "Just try to be better tomorrow than we were today." The Silver Sands Casino issued a formal apology to Alan Foster. They offered him complimentary accommodations any time he wished to visit. Pauline Grant personally implemented new training protocols for all staff on disability awareness and appropriate treatment of guests with special needs. Richard Castellano requested to lead that training himself. He never forgot the man with the white cane, and he made sure no one else at the Silver Sands would forget either. Alan Foster returned to the casino 3 weeks later. When he walked through the doors, every dealer, every pit boss, every floor manager knew exactly who he was. Not because of what happened, because of who he was long before that day, a hero who gave his sight so 6 families could stay whole, a man who valued others above himself, a veteran who deserved honor, not suspicion. The truth is, we live in a world where we judge too quickly, assume too much, and see too little. We look at someone's appearance, their age, their disability, and we think we know their story. We think we understand their worth. But some of the most extraordinary people walk among us unrecognized, carrying histories of courage and sacrifice that would humble us if we only knew. Alan Foster didn't need his sight to see clearly. But the rest of us, we could stand to open our eyes. We could stand to look beyond the surface and recognize the quiet heroes who've already given everything. Subscribe to my channel if you believe every veteran deserves our respect, our gratitude, and our recognition. Not because of what they can do for us today, but because of what they already sacrificed for us yesterday. That's a debt we can never fully repay, but we can start by simply saying thank you and meaning it